what are some of the key symptoms or indicators of burnout? Now you make me understand that in fact, let me leave you say, because it looks now like you have to really derive a way of understanding it, and as of now it's still a bit complex. Can you maybe throw more light on that?
Yeah, so I think there is some agreement between researchers on what probably are common symptoms that most people experience. The key symptom that is typically mentioned always is exhaustion. Often that is seen as really one of the core elements of being burnt out. You feel really mentally, physically exhausted. On top of that, what you also typically see in how people look at burnout is that they say, okay, there's a dimension of cognitive impairment or cognitive complaints, and that's then, for example, problems concentrating. And there's the aspect of emotional impairment, and that's something that you often see with people who are really in this very acute state of burnout. They have problems with regulating their emotions, so they might feel that it's difficult to contain these negative feelings, and they might suddenly burst out crying, for example. The fourth element that is typically there is mental distance, which you could see as more of a motivational aspect. You don't care that much anymore about your work, and you feel as if you're not really contributing to your work also anymore. And I would say those four are really often seen as core symptoms. And then there are some more peripheral symptoms or secondary symptoms, and those are then grouped typically like psychological complaints, psychosomatic complaints, and more depressive complaints.
Yep. So the way you explain it, it looks like it has different phases. It has a mild, an acute, or a chronic phase, static case.
I would say that so if you look at burnout, it develops over time, and depending on the phase or stage of burnout, different symptoms also can play a role. So for example, you typically have a stage where burnout is, but people they're not yet burned out, but they're in this stage of developing a burnout. So they're experiencing perhaps chronic stress, and as a result, they start to feel certain things, certain symptoms, like they might start to feel exhausted from this continuous exposure to stress. They might start to feel that indeed they encounter some cognitive problems like focusing. It's not yet a real burnout, you could say. That's typically a later stage. And that's really the stage where people say, like, I'm unable to function anymore. I'm unable to continue working. And you typically have some different symptoms that really become prominent at that point. As people recover, again, the symptoms might change somewhat, and other symptoms start to perhaps come more to the forefront, while other symptoms have been resolved and disappear. So it's a dynamic thing. That's also something that we really want to tackle with this project, because there's not a lot of attention to the dynamic nature of burnout, really how it develops, and how those experiences can change over time.
Yeah, I will certainly be looking forward to the results of that research. Let's look at academia. Let's say academia. What are some of the main indicators or factors that contribute to burnout in academics?
Well, maybe first of all, I should say that academia is one of the sectors that is known to actually have quite a high rate of burnout. So there have been several studies looking at, for example, PhD students, postdocs, and it's definitely an issue in academia. I would say that the academic context is, of course, somewhat unique compared to other occupational settings. what is perhaps contributing to burnout in an academic context is that often researchers or academic researchers face high workloads, a lot of pressure, for example, pressure to publish, pressure to obtain funding. Something that also contributes is that in some cases, for some people, research or academic research can be let's say something quite individualistic, and you might feel as if you're working rather isolated. And so if that's the case, you lack social support, and that can also be a contributing factor. And of course, one issue that I think is quite relevant for academics is, especially in early stages, that there's a lot of job insecurity. Not knowing what you will do once your contract ends, not knowing whether you will be able to obtain a position, can trigger a lot of stress.
Yep, that is very true. Today I wanted us to focus a bit on PhD students, especially when it comes to academic researchers, because when you're an early career researcher, you lack the experience to really cope with some of these challenges, and then it really can really weigh you down. How can a PhD student, let's say, because sometimes you are in a state of burnout, or maybe you are really stressed, let's say late stage stress, you don't even know that you are in that position. How can someone recognize that they are going through this?
Okay. It's not that easy, because one of the things that we commonly see with people who run into a burnout is that they often fail to notice these things in themselves. Even it's often even the case that people in their environment, like friends or relatives, see the early signs before they do it themselves. But I would say that as if you're a PhD student and you're worried about this, you might look at a couple of things. If you feel continuously exhausted, if you feel unmotivated, you don't care that much anymore about your work. If you feel especially that you are overwhelmed by your emotions, you cannot really control those emotions, and you're continuously worrying, then I would say, okay, it might be best to seek professional advice, because you might be in a stage where burnout is looming, and so if you don't act, maybe you will reach that tipping point and actually become burned out. The thing is, of course, hopefully people can recognize signs of stress a bit earlier, so that they can prevent burning out. And for that, I would say it's important to mainly focus on making sure that you have enough recovery from stress.
I really like this discussion, because like you mentioned, when you talk about psychological contract, it reflects back on because when you look at PhD dropouts, it's mainly about people being stressed, or maybe they get into a situation of burnout, and supervisors or people they work around, they are unable to recognize that they are in a difficult situation. And like you just mentioned, sometimes you are in it and you don't even know that you are in it, and so you cannot even express yourself. How can you enlighten maybe supervisors or the academic community to be able to give supportive support to PhD students?
So I think for supervisors of PhD students, they really have an important role. I think for supervisors, it is important to monitor stress and stress levels in your PhD students, to pay attention to that, and also to sometimes protect people from themselves. I sometimes notice this in my own environment, that you have PhD students who are really driven, really motivated, and they work really hard, and have almost no time to recover, because they work in the evenings and weekends. And I think if that's the case, as a supervisor, you need to make sure that it doesn't turn into an unhealthy situation. I often feel that you need to try and protect some people against themselves and see like, okay, or maybe clarify, look, it's not necessary for you to work, for example, in evenings or weekends. It's not expected of you. Of course, if people really want to do it, you cannot stop them to some extent. But as a supervisor, you need to signal that it's not needed, not necessary, that's not expected, that's not part of a regular work or normal work environment. And so I would say that as a supervisor, making sure that you monitor and also talk with PhD students about, well, stress that they experience, the stressors in their environment as well, is already really helpful. If you can talk to them about stressors, then you can also discuss possible solutions with them. For example, if they say, you know what, I'm really stressed out by the fact that I haven't published yet or something like that, or I'm really stressed out by this feeling that I'm not doing as well as others, then you can try and either either helping them to get realistic expectations and for example, making sure that they don't compare themselves too much to others, but also sometimes you can make very practical solutions.
That is, it's so important because when you get into it, like you said, you get so excited, you really want to do work, and then you put a lot of effort. But the way research is, the way I have also my short experience in it for 3 years now, is things never work out the way you think they will do. They never flow through. So for early career researchers like PhD students, me included, is when you hit that rock, it's really bad. That you have to go back, maybe do something again. And if you don't have the advice of the supervisor, if you don't have the input, it's really draining. Yeah, thank you very much. Let's say, what are some important things? Because it's also important to prevent. Sometimes it's good to prevent than to maybe find your way out of it. What are some important things that you feel PhD students can really do to avoid getting themselves in a burnout situation?
Okay. So I would say the main thing the main thing to focus on is making sure that you have sufficient recovery from stress. That's I would say one of the first things to look at. So what do I mean by that? Recovery activities can be quite diverse. What helps me recover can be quite different from what helps you recover. For some people, being physically active, going to the gym, doing sports can be a recovery experience. For others, it's connecting with friends, with family. For others, it's maybe just taking some time off and sitting in a couch while reading a book. But it's important to have these recovery experiences, and that also means that you need to create some boundaries between work and non-work often, making sure that you don't have work interfering continuously with your other domains in life. So that also means very practically, I would typically suggest not checking your emails constantly and things like that to ensure that you're not constantly thinking about work. Another thing that is quite important but often difficult for early career researchers and PhD students is learning to say no. Because it's often you have a lot of things that you could do and you feel that it would be helpful for your future career or for your research to participate in all these things, but the workload can quickly become too much. And so saying no, really, that's also from personal experience, that's one of the hardest but most important things to learn in academia.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Tim. Are there some supportive services that you think PhD students can use, or early career researchers, or let's say researchers as a whole can use to help them get out of stress or maybe burnout?
Yeah. So I would say that you do have, of course, professional advice that you can seek, professional help that you can seek. Many universities have psychologists where you can actually um, uh, get help. They know also the academic context, so they can understand what may be what may be stress or forms of stressor for you. So um, those support systems are really important in case that it's really an acute phase of burnout. Um, Other than that, I think it's also quite important to think about, okay, do I have a support network? And by that I mean a support network of maybe colleagues, other PhD students, could also be friends, family, but having a support network, social support, is a really important buffer against stress and further development of burnout.
Yeah.
So that is something that would also be quite important to look at and can be a very strong resource. What I would be maybe a bit careful with is relying perhaps too much on books, but like self-help books that are typically published that promise to solve burnout by making you like a better, stronger, more resilient individual. Resilience is of course um, helpful. I mean, and you can become more resilient by using right coping strategies and things like that.
But that also develop over time, I think.
Yeah, and I think the main issue is that those books typically focus on personal characteristics, like how
Yeah.
you cope with things. I can teach you how to cope with a situation, but if you go back to work after a burnout and the job context with all the stressors, the workload, it didn't change, you're gonna have a really hard time not to relapse into that burnout. So the job context is really important. Even the most resilient individual can become burnt out if the job context contains too many stressors.
That's true. Completely agree. Um, let's look, in your opinion, what are some potential areas for further research into stress and burnout?
I think the two areas that are really important for future research and also where a lot of people are focusing on now are one for burnout, prevention and early detection. So like you mentioned yourself before, it's better to prevent than to help people recover. But that means that we need to develop some tools for early detection so that we can actually intervene before people burn out. And I think the work that we do also tries to look at that. The other element that I think is really important is to look at the unique experience of individuals. So burnout and the development of burnout is something that can be quite unique for each individual. So, for example, what is a stressor for me might not be a stressor for another individual, or the symptoms that are typical for my burnout experience might not be the same as those that are typical for another individual.
Yeah.
So that also means that if you want to create good interventions, for example, to help people recover, then you need to know what is unique about that individual's experience.
Yeah.
And that's a real shift in how we do research. It's also a shift towards more personalized interventions, which is something that I think has a lot of promise to improve our way of helping people.
That is very true. I think health care is more and more going to a personalized perspective. Can you give some recommendations to the academic community, administrators, leaders in the academic community, on how to better avoid or prevent burnout or stress among researchers, among especially early career researchers?
I think for organizations, universities, one of the first pieces of advice would be make sure to focus not just on the individual. So by that I mean don't just focus on introducing mindfulness courses or other trainings to make the individual more resilient. Because like I said, that might help to some extent, but you're not dealing with the key trigger, which is the job context. So you need to also pay attention to the job context, the workload, the stressors that are actually causing the chronic stress experience and the burnout development. So that's one important element. The other is, like I mentioned before, supervisors play a very important role because they can offer a lot of support to an individual. So they can be a powerful resource that can help people to cope with stress and to avoid burning out. So making sure that you make supervisors aware of their role in this process, make them aware of what they can do to help individuals, and that can be simple things like I mentioned, just for example, talking regularly with PhD students about their well-being can already do a lot. I think that is something that organizations, universities should also really pay attention to help prevent burnout development.
Thank you very much, Professor Tim. I will go personal to you now. What are your future research interests and plans?
So I think we started now working on this topic of burnout as a dynamic system of interacting symptoms or network of interacting symptoms. I think that is really the thing that I'm focusing now more on, and I will focus on more in the future. I think one of the goals that we have with this line of research is really to develop personalized interventions and really create these types of early warning systems where we can actually see, okay, for you as an individual, what are the key drivers of stress and burnout for you? What are key elements of your burnout experience so we know what to focus on if we want to help you? And can we actually help you to recover in time before you actually burn out?
Burnout, yes. That is quite interesting. What can you tell a 16 or 15 years old student who is still contemplating if they should pick build a career in psychology or not?
Okay. I would say one of the things that I notice with our students and with people who are interested in psychology is that people often have maybe the wrong idea of psychology or maybe a stereotypical idea of psychology. The thing is that psychology is a very broad domain because it's about people, how people think, feel, behave. In various contexts. So it's not just therapy, it's not just clinical practice. It's also, for example, about how people behave in a work context. It's about how people behave in social contexts. And so I would say talk to psychology students, maybe follow a couple of lectures, try to get a better perspective of what psychology is about in all its different facets. And maybe another recommendation is become a psychologist because you really feel curious and driven to understand and help individuals. I think that is the key driver or motivator that I see in a lot of people who continue to work in the field. So if I would say that if that is your passion, then psychology might be for you.
Go for it. What has been the most difficult moment in your career, and how did you overcome it?
So maybe I would say maybe the phase of being an early career researcher. I think the phase where I did a postdoc was a difficult moment because of the job insecurity. I had a 1-year contract, for example, and not knowing, okay, what is going to happen after that year? Will I be able to continue working in academia or not? That's tough. I think in terms of advice, I tried at the time, I tried to focus on the present. I tried not to worry too much about the future, although of course it's more easily said than done. And I also try to like tell myself continuously, look, continuing in and pursuing an academic career to a certain extent, of course, that will depend on your skills, your capacities, and things like that. But it also has a lot to do with luck, being the right person at the right time, at the right place. And so don't take it too hard if you don't get a position or you don't get something. Because I mean, it's not, that doesn't mean that you are not doing your job well. It's simply sometimes luck that will determine your path forward.
Yes, let's look at what is one of your most fulfilling moments in your career, one of the most happiest.
I think that I find the aspect that I find most fulfilling about academic research or work in academia is those moments where you can collaborate with people and you feel inspired because of the intellectual discussions that you have, the sharing of ideas. Those moments are really, I really treasure those moments. So this idea of discussing discussing a new idea, brainstorming together. Other than that, I would say the happiest moments are also often when I have PhD students that just like they obtain their PhD. It always makes me feel just so happy for them, and those are often the happiest moments as well.
The last one. What is the best quote that carries you through your research?
So I never really had a quote or saying or something like that. I thought a bit about it, but maybe there's like two principles that kind of helped me over the years. And the first one is not worrying too much about things that you cannot control. Instead, focusing on the things that you do have control over. And then the second one, paying kindness forward. So the idea of, okay, helping others, even if it doesn't really like serve your own interests immediately. I think that ultimately you will benefit from these kinds of things. Helping others will help you also to build a community of people that support you in return as well. And that's really invaluable.
That is one of my my principles as well. I always say you don't need a reason to be kind.
Absolutely.
So do you have some last words you like to tell our listeners, Professor Tim?
I would say, well, maybe that if you're interested in this type of research and burnout and employee well-being, it's a fascinating area of research. There's lots of novel things happening these days. I think it's exciting for the future because I think that hopefully in a decade from now we will understand phenomena like burnout better and we will be able to help people better. So if you're interested in this topic, I would say it's a very exciting period to just see the research that is coming out, and hopefully I can contribute to that as well. Even if it's a tiny bit, I would be happy.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Tim, and thank you for your insight and your experience that you shared with us today. We are really grateful. And to our listeners and followers, please always try to share. It can benefit someone next to you, as well as if you like this episode, please give us a comment. You can share to a colleague or to a friend, and we hope that it helps. And that is the principle that we carry at Research and Science Diaries. Thank you very much.